So Dr. Al Kennedy really touched on what I was trying to do with this film, but he also said the film make a shared hard truths and with a gentle touch. That was really the goal. I just wanted to make some points, some valid points, what was going on. I thought, y'all can still hear me? So the Anti-Gravity magazine, I love the statement he made in the paper. He said, I can't recommend this movie enough. And y'all remember Alfred Richard? He said, a film that I really liked. And I guess a lot of other people liked it as well, because these are the awards that we won for A Place Called Desire. As we go through these images, there's some things I want you all to pay attention to. And how many people have ever heard you need to read your photographs? Okay, there's always something in a photograph that you may have not noticed, and you come around later and you say, oh, I didn't know that. Case in point, Terry and I was doing a obituary for our aunt. And we had a picture of our dad and his siblings, and there was two ladies in the background. We didn't see the first one because she was in the doorway. Come to find out, that was our great-grandmother. We had never had a picture of her. So think about it. Photographs are silent witnesses that outlast concrete and steel. When buildings crumble, images ensure as a testimony. In the battle of perspectives, and that's what you got to, with this collection, remember now this is industrial photography versus the personal albums. Because we had, in A Place Called Desire, we had a lot of personal videos and pictures as well. And basically, it's whoever has the camera can reveal the truth or conceal it. This is a timeline, and I love working with timelines because it kind of puts you in the area that you want to be in. And of course, the housing started in 1937 with the Federal Housing Act. You know, St. Thomas was built 1938. It was built for the white residents of New Orleans. It was one of the first housing developments in the country. And anybody knew about the Big Four? That was the Magnolia, the Lafitte, not the Calliope. How do you say it? Calliope? but the Calliope. So that's how we know if you're native or not. And the St. Bernard. So we're going to talk about that. And it's amazing. There's images of all of these from the beginning in this collection. So this kind of starts the collection, 1925. Now, this house was marked to be destroyed, but I tell you, I think you slap a little paint on it these days, this might be a $2 or $3 million home in New Orleans now. And that's looking at it from a different angle. But I mean, that's a nice looking house, you know. That's the side street. Notice the streets though, we'll talk about that later too. Now, we lived uptown on General Taylor Street. This looks like our old backyard. They had a shed, but other than that, that was our backyard with the bricks and all that. We thought we were living high on the hog. So the Iberville project, which was, of course, Storyville, this is what they tore down to put the Iberville project, and we'll talk about that a little later too. But I want to say about the landfill that those of us who lived in Desire know about it. 1909 was when they first opened that dump. But here's 1939, and look what's on there. And they closed it and reopened it in 65 for Betsy. So this is another part of the city where they were clearing up for another housing development, Calliope, you know. And I know you all know about the incinerator that was over there, that because there was so much in the landfill, they had to do something, so they actually built another incinerator to actually handle the volume. But here you go again. Notice the streets, and I haven't been up there in a while, but Religious Street, Felicity, Nunn Street, I don't even know where those streets are. They may have been renamed, but this is the area where St. Thomas would come about. So the collection, she mentioned, Amanda mentioned about the annual reports. Actually, I stumbled upon them looking for something else. And I tell you, if you want to just sit down and spend a whole evening looking up images about the city of New Orleans and the surrounding areas, all the housing developments, but also what the city looked like, those annual reports are great to have. This is the one you just happened to mention, 1939 is the one I was interested in. That's the first one. So there's 14 online that you can get right now, and they're putting many more. St. Thomas Project, doesn't that look nice? You know, you put that up north somewhere, that would, you know, say in Boston or somewhere like that, you know, you might be paying $500,000 just to live in something like that. This is the first article I ran across about desire. This is about Louisa Street. This is 1940. And I was like, I didn't know they had people living back there. And it was a mixed community. It was black and white that lived in this community. And from Old Gentilly Road to Florida Walk. Now, we know it as Florida Avenue, but it was Florida Walk originally. And I did a little storyboard because I thought it would be something to probably look into. I wouldn't mind even doing a little short documentary on just this article, but I summarized it and I wrote this script on it.
Home made by hand. In the forgotten folds of New Orleans, along a muddy stretch of Louisa Street, past Florida Walk and the old Gentilly Road, something remarkable took root in the shadow of the cypress trees. It wasn't a neighborhood in the way city planners imagined. It was a village born of necessity, stitched together with scraps, grit, and a longing for something called home. Homes rose from the swamp like quiet declarations, roofs patched with tar paper, walls paneled in flattened oil cans, steps carved from felled saplings. There were no blueprints, only willpower. One church even crowned its steeple with a tin phonograph horn, an upside-down morning glory, calling neighbors not just to worship, but to believe. There was no running water, no utilities. Yet every day, men, women, and children walked a mile or more to fill tin pails from a single brass faucet, packing them onto carts, wheelbarrows, or shoulders, because thirst did not ask for permission. They farmed the swamp, crawfish, catfish, picks, what others called shoepeak, and gardens growing tall between leaning fences. Salt meat sizzled in battered pans, greens simmered. Cornbread was born from corn they raised on city soil. On Sundays, 2 patchwork churches filled the air with hymns. Singing rose through screened galleries woven from cast-off mesh, repurposed to keep out the mosquitoes, but never the joy. Beds were pallets. Walls wore cut-out pictures from newspapers and magazines, portraits of dreams pasted with care. Yes, the homes sagged, leaned, but they stood. Because when the urge to have a home strikes the human heart, nothing much can block it. They may sag and lean, but they're homes.
So this is actually the picture of the steeple from one old photograph. This was in that article, and there was the guy with the wheelbarrow. And the quality, of course, I tried to reach out to the Times-Picayune, but that was 19. They wasn't gonna find any images like that. So, but that is Louisa Street, that stretch from Old Gentilly Road all the way down, and then Louisa got a little turn, and then it comes all the way down to Florida, and this is Avenue, but it's Florida Walk back then. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the area, how many people have been in Desire? That's well, not necessarily this map, but the article was. Yeah. So how many knew that there was the colored industrial school back there? Okay. How about the Cobb House, Conrad Cobb? You remember that big house that sat next to Swagman that you could never see? Okay, you know the Cobb restaurant that's on St. Charles Avenue? That's that family. Conrad had died, but his wife bought this land, and that's where they lived. This area right here And we'll see a little more of this later. But here's the Higgins shipyard. You know, that was told that the Higgins boat actually saved World War II. And this was all done right here in Desire. In the census that I looked up, all of these slits that were here, they had ships in there. So there were people from all over the world, because they actually did an inventory of the people who were on the ships as well. So they was on the census records too. Okay, so this is the ED map of the community. And notice the big section over here, there's nothing there. That's where the Desire housing development ended up. This area right here is where Culver ended up at. And this red area was the landfill. Now this map is 1940. Now let's talk about the census. Someone mentioned in a panel discussion how great information that is on the census. And in that article, it mentioned that some of the people say that they had bought their land. Others say we were squatters, we just landed there. Well, it makes you wonder, these O's mean that they own their land. Makes you wonder if somebody was selling this land to them that didn't own it, because this was city property. Now, the trip part about it on this one, this is actually the landfill. So over here it says, this is where the address is normally. These are the people who lived on the city garbage dump. That's what it says. And so there's some people say owner, they paid $20. This one had $10, $15. Some con man probably was selling land. And now if you look over on this side, you see the professions of these people. They're collectors, junk collectors. There's a glass collector, but for the most part, they're living off the land. And this column here said same place because it asks, where were you living in 1935? They were all still staying on that same property. So this even goes back beyond the census. The big four, all right, that's Lafitte. Some nice looking buildings and stuff. You know, the Magnolia. This is the surrounding map for the Magnolia. You know, we had Flint Goodrich Hospital right there, LaFawn School. What else was on LaSalle Street that's just come back? There you go. The Dewdrop is right there. So, all right. And then the Clarity housing project. Actually, we got somebody in the document, in a piece of the documentary that's going to talk about that. St. Bernard, Cheryl, you asked me about St. Bernard picture. There you go. Terry, this is right by your old neighborhood. These are some of the annual reports. You saw 1939. This is 40, 41. And this one on the end is 42 to 44. What was going on at that time? The war, yeah. So that was a good one to actually, and I sat down one night and went through the whole thing. And this is some of the things I found. This was a farmer's market. Look at this. They were actually looking at a movie outside. And I'm like, look at all those people with that little bitty screen. But I guess you did what you had to do, you know. This was the men's club for the Lafitte project. This was the nursery in the Magnolia. And this guy, he kind of looked like me, but I'm going to leave that right there. But look, they had big leagues. They had, you know, baseball leagues where they played against the different developments. And this is St. Bernard. They won that year. I mean, had uniforms and everything. So here's that Cobb house right here. Now, look at all of this. What do y'all think this is? And you can read the description. This is the Hanover collection, number 70. And on the back of it, it said, new subdivision shows city growth towards Chef Montour. This is Chef Montour. So where do you think this is? Yeah, Gentilly. Yeah, Gentilly Woods. Now, because of the Higgins shipyard, I was trying to figure out, well, what are these? This was called the shipyard homes. They were built for the people who worked at Higgins, and that's what they look like. And they had a lot of activities going on there, too. This was a scouting event. They were big into the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. Go look at the award ceremony. All that's in that 1942, 44 annual report. But here we are in 1950, and you can tell the city still a need for, this is Uptown, handle number, 322. This reminds me of those that were right off of Washington Avenue. They had a complex look just like that. And I always wondered when it was going to fall, because eventually I think they tore it down, but it always looked like it was ready to fall on its own. City of New Orleans. So we're going to journey around the city. You know, that's what the city was like. Now, this is the Florida housing. They had the nun there. Now, I was kind of curious about this child right here. She kind of stood out to me. And I don't know, yeah, maybe it's the lighting, I don't know. But that was kind of an interest. But the Florida housing was also developed as Higgins homes as well, originally. And then they knew that after the war was over with, they were going to convert them to apartments for white residents. How you like this? This is Iberville housing. The nurses are visiting the gardens, 1950. Okay, so this is what I used, my case study for a place called Desire. Anybody heard of the Louisa Street homes? I know y'all saw the documentary though, so that would kind of cover that. But I did notice in this article, they said in 1944, there was a private company that actually was driving pollens. And this is not the government, so I'm curious of who this was, that they were talking about a 20-block area, and they were going to have some houses, but they also mentioned there was a development. Some of the Negroes that said they applied for it, they wanted to be there as well. So don't know if that was part of the government actually hiring an independent company, but I thought that was of interest because the pollens for Louisa homes hadn't happened yet. It was 2 years in the makings. It was 1946 that they actually started building the homes in Desire. This is part of the documentary.
The Pittman Construction Company introduced its Louisa Street homes, not just up and down Louisa Street, but also on Piety, Metropolitan, Cluett, and Feliciana Streets. The first homes built for African-American veterans returning from World War II.
So these are the ads that they actually had in the paper. Attention, Mr. Colored GI. You know, I don't know, that sounds kind of steep, $1,700 cash. But they talk about the pre-war tubs and all of that, hot water. That was big doings. They have hot water even. They talked about a large playground. There was no playgrounds in Desire when that was built. Sampson Park came much later, not into the 50s. And when interviewing people, first of all, let me give you my process. I do my research on a community or the area that I want to tell a story about. So I did all of the research that I can find. And then from that, I actually create my interview questions that I'm going to ask the people that I'm going to interview and try and put the best person with whatever that story may be. So I interview the people, and then they'll tell their story. And then you always go back and see, okay, they may have mentioned, okay, well, when I was living back there, this would happen. Well, then you go back and try and find images that actually match their narrative. And that's what happened here. So all of these veterans telling me about, because I used to I was a member of the men's club at St. Philip, and I was the youngest member. And these guys, like Mr. Jones was 100, you know, had people in their 90s. And of course, at the meeting, after everybody had a little taste, they had stories to tell. So I heard a lot of stories about being a veteran, you know, what it was like, talk about the Negro Baseball League and all of that. And so when we Bernice, so once you heard those stories, then you go and try and match what their narrative is, and this is what happens.
My husband looked in the paper and he saw this place for sale. So he called up the agent and made arrangements to come down and look at the house. I didn't want to move down here because I'm used to uptown and I didn't know much about, well, that was downtown. And I didn't want it. After we saw the house, I still didn't want it. And I told my husband I wanted to live in the Calliope project because I had relatives and friends that lived in the Calliope project, and then I could walk back and forth to my mother's house. But then he said, well, you don't have to get it if you don't want to. And I said, oh, now I've talked myself out of a hole. But anyway, I gave in, and we bought the house.
That was back in 1946. So Elaine said she saw a place way back in the ninth ward, the upper ninth ward. I said, well, baby, we'll go take a look at it. So the next day we took a ride. The streets were so bad we had to park on Louisa Street and walk 2 blocks in mud, slush and all that to get to the house. They had no drainage. The only drainage they had was the sewage out there, the gutters, and my children used to catch crawfish in them. So we decided to buy his house at 3011 Fluid Street.
Now let me say, in that article, that 1940 article, they mentioned how muddy the streets was and that they would actually catch crawfish. So here he confirmed the story from that article. Now this is from Father Kinney, who was the first, the second priest at St. Philip. And this was his photograph. And this is where St. Philip ended up, right on this side here. He had an arrow right here that showed where St. Philip. But this is Metropolitan Street. Metropolitan and Humanity. You're going to hear that again. But that was 1949.
Couldn't get a cab back. If it rained, you couldn't get a cab. Lewis had a cab. I don't know I can't remember the name of the cab. But he was the only one that would come back there if it rained. Because they said, oh no, there ain't nothing but a mud hole back there.
Now, Miss Ism just passed. She was 105. When I interviewed her, she was 100.
They had a place on this side called the Hideaway. Fast Domino used to play. I used to go stand right next to the piano, and he would play. He was a blues singer, and they used to dance in there when Fast Domino would play. The lady would get on top of the table and dance. I used to get a beer. The beer was 15 cents a bottle, Jack's or Falstaff or whatever. And when he played, it was 25 cents a bottle. And I get my beer and go stand right next to the piano. I was 25 years old.
And see how people tell that story. And then, as time went on, and I did a little more research on, the Hideaway Club and all that stuff. And it was in the 2800 block of Desire. So it was that first block. And I'll show you in some of the Hanover photographs of where it would have been. Now, before I play this, you see this picture of this bus? I had about 3 or 4 people mention about the bus. They call it the nickel bus. And nobody knew or had a picture of it or anything like that. I took one of the photographs and I saw something, I'm like, oh, that looks like a bus. So I blew it up and it was the nickel bus that they were talking about.
We used to call it the nickel bus. It used to run from Higgins in the back all the way to Galvez Street. And it was a school bus. And sometimes the nickel bus, we'd stand there so long waiting for the nickel bus. Sometimes it would come, sometimes it wouldn't come. And people used to be fussing about the bus. You know that bus? And if it didn't come, sometimes we'd just start walking.
We spoke to him we told him what we was doing, that we had a lot we had bought on a corner of Humanity and Metropolitan. And we was trying to build a little church because we'd gone to church in the Delta Theater and it wasn't too convenient for the elderly people and a lot of people, climbing up them steps and whatnot. They said, gentlemen, you guys are trying to build a church. He said, we decided to give you a recreation building. It's an empty building. The only thing about it, you would have to cut it up and haul it away the best way you can. We have no way of hauling it away. If you want the building, you can have it. You know, we decided to get a flatbed truck. We rent one, a long flatbed truck. And we went over there, and we got our tools together and everything. It was skill saw. We start cutting it up, put it on a flatbed truck, and roll it from Jackson Barracks. That's almost in St. Bernard Parish. That's the end of the line. From there, we had to haul it all the way down to Metropolitan and Humanity, right on the corner. Well, I think it took about maybe about 3 months. Father died, had to leave. So Father Kenny came along and took his place.
Now, you know, Father Kenny had all of these pictures in his collection. What if he hadn't had those? Because it wasn't that much longer after that he passed. So, and he had sent me these pictures before that. But all the stuff that Mr. Cavalier talked about the community, Mr. Queer, I mean, all of the elders had so many good stories to tell. And I'm like, wow, these are storytellers, you know. So we are now down to, I'm about to get into the Desire now, 1950s. This is Father Kenny's collection again. What is this big ugly spot right here? The landfill. It even looked bad on the picture, doesn't it? But look, this is where, that's St. Philip right there. So this is after they moved that and built that church right there. And also that them building the church, that was Mr. Cavalier up on the roof, and him telling me this story, then all of a sudden here's his picture pop up. And I'm like, wow. Now, Mr. Queer talks about, and I didn't take that clip out, but she talked about a church that was where Sampson Park was. That's it right here on the corner. This is before the city took the land back, because the city had given them this land, and then they took it back to build a park. Now remember in the ad, they said they had parks in the community. This was the only park we had, you know? And so that was false advertisement. I don't know, maybe we can get our money back. But here's the Delta. Here's the Delta Theater right here. And Club Desire would have been right here. Now these are the houses that was there that they tore down before to build the housing development. Now, there was two different angles of this. Some of these houses you're gonna see, because they was in the collection, what they look like. But there was others that I had interviewed people that actually talked about the house that they built, and it was a nice house. But remember who had the camera when the Hano collection was done, and why? It's a promotional piece. Okay, so, but here I blew it up, but that's St. Philip. The rest of the lot was, which is where the school ended up being. But that was that one church. And that was the church that they would actually recruit people to go vote, to register to vote. So they would actually have a meeting on Wednesday night. And Mr. Queer talks about that in the documentary. Okay, this is the Florida housing under construction. Again, these are great photographs. You know, these are this is no drone pictures. You know, these are actually done from either a helicopter or an airplane. Now, these are the houses that they talked about before Desire, that they tore down. I could see that, but they never took a picture of this house. That looked like a pretty good house right there. But remember now, this is a picture that they want to justify why they tore down those houses. But this house looked pretty good to me. There's another one. But this kind of ties in with that article in 1940, what the houses look like, with the top roofs and all of that. Look at that one. Look at that one. And this is all in that Hano collection that you can get online. Now, they're all online, so if you want to just kind of explore yourself, you can. Now, this was of interest here. Construction of Desire. And every project they had, they always had an extension. So St. Bernard had an extension, Lafitte had a, every one of them. Magnolia had an extension. Can you remember how the bricks were different in Magnolia? You had those with the red brick, and the other one came with the light beige bricks. Same thing here, but they end up having to change contractors in the midst of all of this building. This is the Florida down here, and there's the Florida Canal. There's the Delta, and these are the Louisa Street homes. And of course, all back here is the Industrial Canal, and the Higgins Shipyard is up here. Now, this is the first school. That's Moulton. Notice Dunn is not built. There's the lot, but it's not built yet. We might have a remnants of a park now. The church is gone. Okay, and this is Desire when it was opening up.
Well, Desire was basically, a mixture of everybody. Because when Desire opened, people come from just about every ward they had, and moved in Desire.
All right. This is one of my favorite pictures here. But notice.
And when we talk about Desire, it was the best living at the time. And I come back there, like I said, about 15, 16 years of age. That was the best living I had. Hardwood floors, the hallway is hardwood. That big one space heater was, I don't care if you had 4 bedrooms, a living room and the kitchen, that one big space heater keep that whole house warm. And you see, a lot of people don't know, like in the Trimmy area, I don't know, for some reason, a lot of those homes, they were built, but they weren't wired for electricity. And so, I didn't have electricity in my home until I was about 11 years of age. We used to have to go kerosene oil from the store or catch the coal man who came by and sold hampers of coal, and we use it for the fireplace. Being fortunate to have indoor facilities for using, like bathing and restrooms and stuff. That I understand what the term outhouse means, because we had to go out the house to go to the restroom.
World War I, I had somebody in there that told me that men went to war that didn't have no education, couldn't even sign their name. And it was in my spirit that I would try to see that everybody under me, if I could, to get them to go to school, that they might learn.
By 1958, the Desire Housing Project had over 13,000 residents, of which 11,000 were children. That number did not reflect the hundreds of kids who lived in the Louisa Street homes. The Desire development would need its own elementary school. In fact, there were enough children to support 2 or more schools. The first public school to open in the Desire community was Robert R. Moulton Elementary School at 3101 Desire Parkway. Henderson H. Dunn Elementary School would be erected about 3/4 of a mile from the Moulton School. It would be the second school built to educate the thousands of elementary-aged children in the area. Even after the completion of 2 schools, the Orleans Parish School Board knew it had not satisfied the educational needs of the Desire area. Charles R. Colbert, the supervising architect of the Orleans Parish School Board, suggested to the board it should build suburban school villages where large plots of land could be purchased at a reasonable cost. The school board purchased a 90-acre plot of land for $300,000.
You know what Desire Project did for us? After all them years from 46 to 50, the Lord answered our prayers by putting the project. Because when the project come Carver High School.
This is one of my favorite pictures. I don't know if they were coming from school but everybody's so dressed up. This is the 1950s. I remember the bookmobile, but that was in the 60s. But I just love this picture.
I didn't know we were poor until I started, hearing about it on the news. I didn't know I lived in a ghetto until I started hearing about it on the news. But I tell you what, I wouldn't have traded the experience for anything.
Good was a sense of community and a sense of belonging to something. I never felt, you know, and it was funny, and I guess other neighborhoods may have had this, but when you encountered people from other parts of the city, they may have had a perception of desire that we, who were members of the Desire community, didn't have. You know, people say, oh, you're from the Ninth Ward, or oh, you're from Desire. And it was like, yeah, so what? You know, I mean, it was a place to grow up. It was, to me, the best of all worlds. The bad of Desire was that, you know, we were in an area or a time in which the city was evolving, and I think Desire was forgotten a lot of times. You know, I go back there today and I look and I think it's happened again, that community is, in some ways, has been forgotten. Ugly of it, you know what? It's funny. I don't know. Maybe it's the clarity of time, but the things that seem so ugly or so bad don't necessarily seem that way now. I think some of the things that other people would thrust upon your community, maybe that was the ugly of it. But if you were in it and you were living there, you didn't see it. You know, you didn't feel it. You know, people struggled, but people worked. People provided for their families. You know, I could look and think back down that block we grew up in, the number of role models and people, the life lessons I learned today, you know, and like I said, starting at home. Etta and Smitty, my parents, you know, they taught us to believe in ourselves, and they taught us to be individuals, and you know, they wanted a better life for us, and I think that's the beauty of Desire. People growing up at that time, they wanted a better life for the next generation, and if we can take that today and apply that to our generations that are coming behind, the entire city could learn something from Desire in that respect.
The whole collection that's online is 339 pictures. I'm gonna rip through them kind of fast, so, but if you see something you want, Cheryl, St. Bernard or whatever, you know where to find them. Okay. You know, when you're doing this at home, you figure you got too much, and I'm early. So I guess this is a good time for a Q&A, if need be. Greg, don't sit, because you can help me with the mic. as having them an option to move in to the new, that didn't happen. And you know, it's amazing. In the library, there's a collection of letters that a lot of people were requesting. You know, I live such and such, and I would love to get, a lot of them weren't even answered. But that's all, they have those records. But no, they didn't have first preference.
This is related. It struck me watching the presentation. So where did all the people go whose houses were destroyed to build the project? Because even if they were allowed to move in to Desire, there was a gap of time between leaving their homes and the finished product.
You know, that's a good question, because I do know of some people that I interviewed that told me they moved right in the next, across the track in the Florida area. But as far as a whole flux of people, because it was 700 and something families, it was no clear cut where everybody went. And that's one of the amazing things. But again, some of those people say that they did not buy property. They just had squatters' rights, so who knows where they may have ended up. Any more questions? The Cobb? It became a restaurant as well as a truck shop. Yeah. Remember, it was right next to Swagman. And so, yeah, it ended up being a truck stop. It's still there. The truck stop is still there, yeah. But John Scott, you would know John Scott. His family actually worked for them, and they lived on the property. Well, they didn't use preservatives, that's why. You might have a little mold, but other than that, it's Cobb's. It was called Cobb's, yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Lenora? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. You want to say something? I know you mentioned about... Oh, great. Well, you know, our origin, my dad was born in the lower Ninth Ward. On Winthrop Street, which is, okay. You know, it's amazing. I find people in the Ninth Ward, we always find out what streets are. You know, Yeah. You know, sometime you talk to somebody in the city, they say, oh, I lived uptown. But no, in the Ninth Ward, we're going to tell you what street it was. And what's the next street, too? Karen. Okay. I did not see that in there. We used to go to the Rosenwald, by the way. Yeah, because that's when we lived uptown. I did not see in that collection, because I think it was more geared toward the housing developments. But, and I don't know what was where the Rosenwald was before that, you know. The extension. They call it the extension in the collection. Uh-huh. That's right. Okay. Okay. Now, we belong, my cousin is a front, my older cousin. We belong to Troop 518. Those numbers just stick with you. And we were one of the largest troops in the city at one time, because it was made up of Desire, you know, guys and stuff. And there was Brother Bake's troop that was in there as well. So they had two troops, and we were one of the first troops to actually make it to Camp Selman, black troop to go to Camp Selman. So, yeah. I think they cut off in 1991. I think it's the most recent. So if it was after that, probably not. Oh, it was? Okay. Oh, yeah, but then it probably would be in there. If it's not in there, it would be in the annual reports for sure. Oh yeah. And you know, New Orleans, you know, we move around. And if you really want to get deep into the story, I would advise you to look at the letters that they have on file. And it's some interesting stories, some sad stories too, about why people say, I need this unit or whatever. But then there are some funny ones in there as well. You know, it's like, no, we want this because that area is better than where we live right now, you know, something like that. But, and that's in the, what mayor was that? That would have been.
Skiro or Morris?
Skiro.
Skiro.
I think it's Skiro, yeah.
Skiro.
Yeah, because he's in a lot of the pictures, if you notice. He didn't believe in missing a photo op, you know, that kind of thing. All righty. Yeah, they have, you know, and again, you'd have to, but they actually have the index online too. So if you Google it, it'll come up. Well, use their index. But yeah, they have a lot of, some of them, yeah, I didn't go beyond 1970 because I was doing Desire. But they definitely had others that you could definitely pull from. Because, you know, they had the, what's the other ones? The Fisher homes, all of that. They got a lot of pictures of them and that type stuff. And the Gus homes, yeah. Yeah, it's a nice collection. I mean, I didn't know it was there until I started, you know, I'm like, well, wait a minute. And, you know, you do your search online, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they have these pictures online. But that was before they put them online. So I had to go in the library, and she brought me the box, and, you know, I said, I need this one, this one, this one. And I had to pay. It wasn't free at that time. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But now, because it's online, you can. But remember now, if you use these photographs for anything like a documentary, you have to get the releases, the copyright releases, and it's probably a fee, you know, so just so you know. But, yeah. Well, they've asked me to, but I'm going to actually do, there was something I wanted to show you. I'm going to do a virtual screening May the 17th. But before that, I wrote this pamphlet right here, this book. It's 10 reasons why you should document your family history now, because I know you all know what's going on in the news, and we don't know what's going to be locked down or destroyed, because they have a tendency to destroy stuff as well. So this is free. Just scan the QR code. It'll take you to, and you just download it. It's free. Of course, it asks for your name and your email. And the reason why, because a place called Desire, I'm going to do a screening May the 17th, and a virtual screening. And I, you know, as an independent, that's how we have to actually, to create documentaries, that's what we have to do, because nobody's giving us money for, you know, just talking about it. And now that they've cut LEH and NEH and all those now, you know, who knows what's going to happen.
Leonard, did you happen to see anything on the explosion that occurred in the St. Bernard project? That was a huge tragic event. I remember that, you know, growing up, people talked about it before the explosion and after the explosion.
Okay, I did not. But let me say this. One of my main, I guess, research is always in the newspaper. And if you knew the time frame, then if it was covered by, and I would even use Louisiana Weekly as well as the, the Times-Picayune. But That's where I get a lot of my background information. And then, of course, you have to verify based on the sources and that type. But that lady who wrote that article in 1940, you know, it was just it was well written, first of all. And for her to describe this community that people are just, you know, going and get water and they talking and they going to church. It's a non-denominational, you know, blacks and white mixing. This is the 40s, 1940 in New Orleans, you know. So that in itself I thought was so special. And I said, okay, I'm going to use this as a basis for the documentary. Now, one of the things I wanted to make sure too, one of the criterias, and there was a guy that wasn't happy about it, but the criteria was, you had to have lived in Desire, you had to have worked in Desire, you had to have gone to school in Desire, or you had worship in Desire. You know, but the main thing was living in Desire, because you're the person that would actually know what it was like day to day. You know, so anybody who's coming in and going out, that's not the same. And that's how the documentary ended up evolving. Because it had like 3 or 4 different versions before I got to that.
Okay, I want to thank Leonard for his wonderful presentation, for you all coming to hear him. And again, avail yourself of the virtual showing of, I'm sorry, the place called Desire.
All right,
Okay?
great,
Okay?
thank you.
All right, thank you.